Welcome to the tutorial over 6.1 Operations on Functions. Your new vocabulary is composition of functions. First thing we're going to talk about is the operation of functions. Okay, when you see something that looks like the definitions here, what it represents is f plus g of x, meaning you're going to take these two functions and add them together. Or if it says f minus g of x, you are subtracting g of x from f of x. This one says f times g of x. That means you take these two functions and you multiply them together. And then f divided by g of x is where you take your two functions and divide them. And here are examples of what that means. And we're actually going to try our own examples here in just a second. Example 1, it says given that f of x is 3x squared plus 7x, and gx is equal to 2x squared minus x minus 1, we're going to find f plus g of x. So from the previous slide, we know that f plus g of x is actually equal to f of x plus g of x. We can essentially take this and separate it. So if I know that f of x is 3x squared plus 7, I'm just going to replace where I see f of x with 3x squared plus 7. Excuse me. Now, I know that g of x is 2x squared minus x minus 1. So everywhere I see a g of x, I'm now going to replace it with the orange. So plus 2x squared minus x minus 1. Now, the last step is to combine like terms. So I have 3x squared plus 2x squared, which is 5x squared. I'm going to combine my x terms to get positive 6x. And then I have my constant all by itself, so minus 1. So this is f plus g of x. Example 1b, it says given f of x is 3x squared plus 7x, and g of x is 2x squared minus x minus 1, we're now going to find f minus g of x. And according to our rules, f minus g of x, we can actually separate those. That means f of x minus g of x. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace f of x, excuse me, got crazy with my arrows. We're going to replace f of x with 3x squared plus 7, and then we're going to replace g of x with 2x squared minus x minus 1. Now what's really important is that you do this with parentheses. We have 3x squared plus 7x minus 2x squared minus x minus 1. All we're doing is substituting. Now the reason why you want to make sure you put parentheses is because now you have to distribute your negative sign before you can combine like terms. So we get 3x squared plus 7x minus 2x squared plus x plus 1. Last step is to combine like terms. We have 3x squared minus 2x squared to get x squared. We now have positive 7x plus x, which is going to give us an 8x. And then at the end we have plus 1. So you can tell that f of f plus g of x is way different than f minus g of x. Anyway, it says given f of x is equal to 3x squared minus 2x plus 1, and g of x is x minus 4, find f times g of x. According to our rules, f times g of x is the same thing as saying f of x times g of x. So, we know that f of x is 3x squared minus 2x plus 1. So we're going to plug that in where we see f of x, and g of x is x minus 4, so we're going to plug that in. So with parentheses, I have 3x squared minus 2x plus 1, close parentheses, open, x minus 4. Now we're going to take these two functions and we're going to multiply. We're going to actually triple distribute here. So we're going to take 3x squared times x. We're going to take 3x squared times negative 4. So that's actually going to give us a minus 12x squared. Actually, I'm going to write this as 3x cubed so we don't get confused. Alright, now we're going to take our middle term, negative 2x times x, which is negative 2x squared, negative 2x times negative 4, which is positive 8x. And then our last one, we're going to take 1 times x, so plus x, and then 1 times negative 4, which is minus 4. Now, if we have any like terms, we're going to combine them. I see a next couple x squared terms. I see a couple x terms. And so our actual answer is 3x cubed minus 14x squared plus 9x minus 4. That's our answer. Example 2b, given that f of x is 3x squared minus 2x plus 1, and g of x is x minus 4, we're going to find f divided by g of x. And according to our rules, this means the exact same thing as f of x divided by g of x. So, now we're going to plug and check. 3x squared minus 2x plus 1 is going to go on top. And we're going to have x minus 4 go on bottom. So we have 3x squared minus 2x plus 1 divided by x minus 4. Now, I'm going to let you leave it like this, but there's only one thing that you have to add. When we have a rational function, remember you're not allowed to divide by 0. So, when we have something like this, you always want to set the denominator equal to 0 and solve for x. And in this case, all I did was add 4 to both sides. So that means the only thing that this function cannot equal, x cannot equal 4. So you have to put that with your equation. So we have f divided by g of x is equal to 3x squared minus 2x plus 1 divided by x minus 4, such that x cannot equal 4, because that would make the denominator 0. You have to put this, or else your answer is wrong. This brings us to our next concept. This is one that you probably have seen before. It's called a composite function. Sometimes you hear people call this fog functions because it looks like you're saying the word fog, but this means f of g of x. It means we have f on the outside and we're placing g of x on the inside. So it's like we're putting functions inside one another. So, if you look at this model, it can get a little confusing, so make sure you're paying attention. If we want to find f of g of x by using the domain and range of my two original functions, you first have to look at the domain of g, meaning you're looking at your x values first. Then, that's going to give you the range of g, which is the domain of f. So, gives you your y's, and then gives you your x values of f. So then, this is now going to give you the range of f, which is your y values. And it will make more sense here in just a second when we do an example. It says if f of x are the points 2, 6, 9, 4, 7, 7, 0, negative 1, and g of x is equal to 7, 0, negative 1, 7, 4, 9, 8, 2, find f of g of x and g of f of x. We're going to evaluate g of x first, then use the range of g as the domain of f and evaluate f of x. So let's think about it this way. We know that f of g of x is the same thing as saying f of g of x, like this. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to plug in the 7 for x. I'm going to rewrite this as f of g of 7. Now, the trick is you have to work from the inside out. So f of g of 7, we already know is 0 because of that point. So what we can do, since we already know that g of 7 is 0, we're now going to rewrite this as f of 0. So now I can go up here and look at my points, and I'm going to look for a 0 for my x values. Here I found an x value of 0, so that means my y value is -1, so this is equal to -1. Now you're going to do this again. We're going to take the next point of g. We're going to take the x value, which is -1. So we have f of g of -1. Now I'm going to look and see what my y value is, which is right next to it, which is a 7. So now I'm going to replace g of -1 with a 7 to get f of 7. Now I'm going to look for the x value that has a 7 on my f of x, which its y value is actually 7 as well. So this is equal to 7. And we're going to keep going until we get through all these points. Now I'm going to do f of g of 4. And if I look next to my 4, my y value is 9, so I'm going to replace this entire thing with a 9. So f of 9. That means I'm going to look at f of x. Where do I have a x value of 9? That's at 4. And my last one, f of g of 8. I know that g of 8 is a y value of 2. So I'm going to replace g of 8 with 2. So now I'm going to look up here, and I see that my y value is 6. So for my actual answer, I'm going to look at what I plugged in and what I got out, and that's going to be my new point. So for f of g of x, my new points are 7, -1. I got that from here and here. I plugged in a 7 and got out a 7. Plugged in a, oh whoops, I'm looking at the wrong place. Excuse me, ignore that last point. I plugged in a -1, got out of 7. On the next one I plugged in a 4 and got out of 4. And my last point I plugged in 8 and out popped a 6. So 8, 6. So that would be my answer for this question. Now we also have to do g of f of x. So make sure you have this written down because I'm about to clear it. I'm pretty much going to do the same thing, except I'm going to reverse the order. G of f of x is the same thing as g of f of x. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing, except I'm going to plug in the x values of my f of x function. So g of f of 2 first. I know that f of 2 is actually 6 because that's the point. G of 6. And if we go back and look at our y values, we don't have a 6. So that means that this is undefined. And we move on to the second one. G of f of 9, which comes from the second point. We know that the y value is 4, so we have g of 4. So now we have to go back and look on my g function, where there's a 4 for my x, and there happens to be a 9. So that is equal to 9. And the next point, we're going to plug in a 7, so g of f of 7. The y value is 7, so g of 7. And looks like on my points, I have an x here that's a 7, so the y value is 0, so that's my answer. And the last point, we're plugging in a 0, which comes from right here. So g of f of 0. We know that the y value is -1, so we're going to replace f of 0 with a -1 to get g of -1 equals, well, if we look at our g of x function, we have an x value of -1, so my y value is 7. Now we need to create our new points. So, since this is undefined, we're not going to use it as a point. So my new points are going to be, let's see, I input 9 and got out a 9, so my new point is 9, 9. I input a 7, got out a 0, so we have 7, 0. And input a 0 and got out a 7, so 0, 7. Let's see, so the way you write that is g of f of x is equal to, and we have our cute little curly brackets, and that's our answer for g of f of x. Alright, for the next example, we're going to find f of g of x and g of f of x for f of x is equal to 3x squared minus x plus 4, and g of x is 2x minus 1. Alright, so this is kicking you all the way back to 5.3, where you had to plug in different things for your x values. Okay, so we're going to start real easy. So f of g of x means everywhere in your f function where you see an x, you first need to replace it with parentheses, like this. Minus parentheses plus 4. This is going to give you a shell. And what it's saying is everywhere you see an x value in your f of x function, you are now going to replace it with your g of x function, which is already defined to you as 2x minus 1. So we're going to place a 2x minus 1 here and a 2x minus 1 here. Now, in order to get your answer, you now have to simplify. So in order to simplify this piece, it's 3 times 2x minus 1 times 2x minus 1. And here we're going to FOIL in just a second. We're going to take this negative and distribute it to get negative 2x plus 1 plus 4. Alright, now let's go ahead and double distribute or FOIL. We get 2x times 2x, 2x times negative 1 times 2x, and negative 1 times negative 1. So that gives us 3 times 4x squared minus 2x plus 1, close parentheses, minus 2x. I am so sorry about that, again, for the umpteenth time. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and combine 4 and 1 to get a 5, to make my life easier. Combine these like terms to get 3 times 4x squared minus 4x plus 1 minus 2x plus 5. Distribute your 3 to get 12x squared minus 12x plus 3 minus 2x plus 5. Last step, combine like terms to get our answer of 12x squared minus 14x plus 8. That would be f of g of x. Now we have to reverse that and do g of f of x. So make sure you have this written down. I'm about to clear it. So g of f of x means this. So think about it the same way. Now we're saying we're starting with our g of x function, everywhere you see an x, I want you to leave parentheses. So we have 2 parentheses minus 1. And it's saying everywhere you see an x on your g function, you are now going to replace it with your f of x function. So now you're going to write in 3x squared minus x plus 4. And this one's actually a tiny bit easier than the last one. And now we're going to simplify. So 2 times 3x squared, 2 times negative x, and 2 times positive 4. It's going to give us 6x squared minus 2x plus 8 minus 1. Last step, combine like terms. We get 6x squared minus 2x plus 7. That would be g of f of x. And that concludes our video. If you have any questions, make sure to ask your teacher. Have a wonderful day.